Good morning, and thank you all for joining us. We are going to be getting started in just a few moments, as many of you are coming into our session this morning. Again, good morning. We thank you for joining us on part 2 of our webinar series, Redesigning Teaching Licensure. Today, we will have most of you muted. If you have a question, please feel free to use the chat box, or if you want to ask it yourself, you can use the raise hand button, and I will unmute you and you can ask your question during the appropriate time. If you have any other questions, you can also put those in chat. For example, troubleshooting, audio, visual, please let me know. Again, we thank you for joining, and I will pass it off to Dr. Lawrence to get us started.
Good morning and welcome, and thanks to all participating. This is the second webinar in a 3-part series on rethinking teacher workforce solutions. Part 2, redesigning teacher licensure. SRAB is a nonpartisan nonprofit established as an interstate compact in 1948 with 16 states. We serve to help our states in 3 ways: analyzing and publishing data and policy recommendations, convening and engaging educators and policymakers to have difficult, productive conversations, and by supporting action that states, districts, and schools need and want to take to improve policy and practice. With that, at our SRAB, we serve states on many issues and lines of work that span pre-K through workforce. We have a team that leads the teacher workforce policy work, connecting K-12 and higher education research, policy, and convening of leaders on key education human capital strategies. Our team includes yours truly, Stevie Lawrence. I serve as Vice President for Post-Secondary Education. Megan Boren, who's a program specialist with Education Human Capital Strategies, and Jessica Snellings, who serves as a research analyst in our Office of Post-Secondary Education. This morning, I would like to introduce you to 2 panelists. Our first panelist is Andrew Lakis, who serves as Executive Director at Teach for America, Eastern North Carolina. He is also a member of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation Standards Commission, or PEPC, and a member of the North Carolina Human Capital Roundtable. Welcome, Mr. Lakis. We also have joining us this morning, Mark Dixon, who is President of A+ Education Partnership and a member of the recently concluded Alabama Teacher Quantity and Quality Roundtable. Now I'll turn it over to Megan Boren.
Thanks, Stevie. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining our second webinar here in the series, as Stevie said. Our first webinar, we really focused on kind of introducing the idea of our work here at SRAB and helping states, education leaders, and policymakers think through what are the true issues that are causing and contributing to teacher pipeline issues or teacher shortages in our states. And our last webinar, we really focused on the beginning part of this circle here on recruiting more teachers into the profession, preparing teachers better, and diversifying our recruitment and preparation efforts. Today, we're going to continue our discussion and continue kind of working around the circle here, if you will. We're going to talk more about teacher licensure and a bit about teacher equity and some strategies that are coming out of our roundtables to try and work toward increasing the quantity, quality, and diversity of our teacher workforce, but also the equitable distribution of excellent teachers. So as I mentioned on our last webinar, if you had attended the first one in the series, we do have 4 human capital roundtables that SRAB has been convening for a few years now, North Carolina being the first one. And Andrew has been on that roundtable since the beginning. So really glad to have him today to talk a little bit about some of the great work that they're doing. And then Mark's from our second roundtable that began in Alabama, and as Stevie just said, it recently concluded. And they issued a report with some plans that Mark will go into a little bit for us today. We also have 2 more roundtables in Oklahoma and Mississippi. Oklahoma's had concluded last year as well. Mississippi's is still ongoing. And we'll hear a little bit from some roundtable members in those 2 states for our 3rd webinar, actually next week. I sent a message in the chat that has a link to our website. So that's where you can find some more about our work and some briefs, policy briefs, research briefs on some of the discussions that we're having in these 3 webinars, including today. Our work really centers around focusing on the teacher career continuum, as we'd mentioned last time. And we started kind of talking about, again, teacher candidate policies, recruitment preparation, and so on. And today we're going to talk more about the full pipeline here from beginning to end and how to rethink some policies outside of the box, if you will, to make sure that we're thinking about increasing the quantity, quality, and diversity of our teacher workforce. So today's topic again is going to be on teacher licensure. I'm going to send it over to my colleague Jessica Snellings, who's going to talk to you a little bit about some data and some research on the issues around teacher shortages and how teacher licensure comes into the conversation.
Good morning, everybody. As Megan said, we are here today to talk about the redesigning of teacher licensure. But before we get to the possible solutions to a growing problem, we need to define the problem. How severe is the teacher shortage issue? The teacher shortage crisis is an issue across the career continuum. Starting at the very beginning, there's a decline in interest in teaching, starting in high school. The ACT pre-test questionnaire for the 2017-2018 school year showed that only 5% of student respondents were interested in teaching as a career. They listed among the top reasons for not wanting to enter the profession, the low starting pay and the lack of career development opportunities. For those candidates that are interested in teaching and pursue the profession, the barriers, such as high cost of a bachelor's degree and the entrance exams, exist and dissuade some candidates from continuing on their path towards teaching. For teachers who make it through a preparation program, whether traditional or alternative, there's another hurdle that comes during their early career years. One of the top 3 reasons teachers say they have left the profession during the first 5 years of their career is due to the lack of support from administrators or colleagues. The shortage crisis continues to affect teachers who are well established in their career. Without opportunities to grow, many of the most effective teachers choose to leave the classroom and enter administrative roles. All of these pieces of the teacher shortage crisis existed before 2020, but the addition of COVID could exacerbate the crisis even more. The challenges that the nation's teachers have faced during COVID could have real, lasting effects on the profession. It's yet to be seen if there will be a silver lining for teachers, but we do know that our teachers are more stressed, overworked, and tired than ever before. In the 2015-2016 school year, the percent of inexperienced teachers, those with only 1 to 2 years experience in the SREB region states, was 12.7%, which is on par with the national average. The percent of uncertified teachers, those who are practicing under an emergency or provisional certificate in the SREB region states, was 3.1%, which is about 0.5% higher than the national average. And then the percent of teachers who plan to leave the profession in the SREB region states was 7.5%. And while the national average was 9.4%, 4 SREB states had over 10% of teachers planning to leave the profession. These are troubling statistics, and we need to find holistic solutions to reduce the number of uncertified teachers in our classrooms. There's a misconception that the teacher shortage crisis is only in the STEM subjects, but unfortunately, it's a much larger problem. In some states, the shortage is restricted to a few grade levels, but in the vast majority, there's a lack of teachers in all grade levels. During the 2019-2020 school year, out of the 16 states that SREB serves, at least 10 states have shortages in English language arts, math, science, special education, and career and technical education. These shortages are a statewide issue, but the problem is exacerbated in rural and hard to serve areas that cannot provide increased salaries to fill these positions. So when we talk about how to end the teacher shortage crisis in the United States, it is imperative to realize that changing licensure itself will not be the silver bullet that fixes the problem. In order to improve and expand the teaching profession, we need to think about holistic solutions and not just licensure in isolation. We are encouraging our states to explore redesigns of teacher pathways, teacher licensure systems, support systems, and couple those changes with complementary teacher salary schedule redesigns. Many states are creating tiered licensure systems that establish different pathways and foster teaching advancement. Our research shows these systems are not leading to the significant positive change that states are seeking regarding ending teacher shortages and increasing teacher quality. We feel that this is due to 3 key missing pieces for a lot of the tiered systems. The first of which is relying mostly on input-based measures, rather than outputs that measure a teacher's skills, competencies, and instructional abilities. The second piece is a lack of consistent required support mechanisms like teacher mentorship, quality individualized professional development, and collaborative culture. And the third piece we believe is missing is neglecting to create a state-based compensation structure that supports the tiers. This is a key mistake other states have made when moving to tiered licensure, not incentivizing advancement from the state level to help with equitable distribution of excellent teachers. When incentives are left up to the districts to offer on their own, inequitable distribution of excellent teacher grows. This webinar will focus on the licensure portion of the teacher shortage crisis, but our other webinars and research focus in on some of the other equally important parts of the holistic solution. Tiered certification is not the only option when it comes to licensure, but the same principles that are important in tiered certification hold true in all licensure systems. It is important to think about the career trajectory from apprenticeship to advanced roles, to allow a teacher to progress through their career the way other careers provide a ladder or scaffold. In researching and examining teacher licensure systems in all Southern states, as well as around the nation, we found that most systems in the US are based only on input measures, like level of education and years of service. Less than half of states include some output-based measures, like student growth measures and professional growth. Redesigning licensure based less on inputs and more on outputs will safeguard the teaching profession with fewer unintended consequences. Our recommendation to states are to open the gates to anyone who wants to teach with the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities with strong support for growth. Not only do wider gates help increase recruitment, but they also allow for diversity. If opening the gates seems like a terrifying notion, know that pairing the open gates with specific exit points can ensure that we have an effective teacher in every classroom, including those teachers that might not have even considered the profession if not for the chance of early exposure through apprenticeships and other first contact programs like teacher academies and teaching cadet programs. Open and increase the pathways into the teaching profession. In addition to traditional and alternative preparation programs and CTE, bring in apprentice or residency teachers with at least an associate degree to co-teach and study the practice earlier while finishing their degree. One of the top ways to ensure a teacher is ready for the job is to provide them with increased time in a classroom alongside a quality mentor. Another recommendation is to rely much more heavily or even solely on output measures. These measures include knowledge and skills mastery, demonstrated competencies, growth and effective instruction, and demonstrating leadership characteristics. We suggest moving away from inputs like degree level and years of service, as well as assessments that have no proven correlation with effective teaching. And you need to set the same requirements for all teachers, no matter what pathway leads them to the classroom. These same requirements ensure equitable feeding from early high school recruitment, grow your own programs, alternative preparation, traditional preparation, career changers, and many other pathways. We will touch on compensation more heavily in our next webinar on January 27th, but it is important to note that creating a new salary schedule based on these multiple output measures rather than input measures is a crucial piece in redesigning teacher licensure. A fourth recommendation is to build better early career teacher supports to retain early career teachers who have the highest levels of departing the profession and cite lack of support as one of their main reasons for leaving. These supports can be teacher mentors, better quality professional development, and incentives to get the right individualized professional development needed to master the art of teaching. Support should not be a one-size-fits-all system. The right support from the right source can make the difference in retaining a high-quality teacher in the early stages of their career. A fifth recommendation is to help retain teachers longer with advanced teaching roles so that advancement isn't only to an administrative path. These advanced roles are your teacher mentors and specialists. By giving effective teachers the chance to lead from their classroom, they are more likely to stay in the classroom and positively impact their school in multiple ways. It is important to legislate higher pay or bonuses statewide for classroom leadership roles, which no state in the country has done to date. Without a mandated statewide incentive, school systems will continue to lose their most effective teachers to administrative positions and to other professions. To move forward, we can learn from past mistakes and prevent ourselves from repeating them. Certification policies are limiting the teacher pipeline because of confusing, complex policies. Tiered licensure is not reaping the results desired in many states because of a lack of incentives for moving up in the system. It is important for states to rethink salary structures when redesigning licensure. By providing pay to apprentices and residents practicing the profession, states can help remove some of the financial barriers for teacher candidates. As a teacher progresses through their career and proves mastery of their craft, their financial incentives should increase, including a significant pay incentive to those teachers who take on advanced roles and help lead from their classroom. teacher licensure policy changes can also have a positive effect on teacher diversity and equity. Dr. Lawrence will share more on this.
Removing barriers into the teaching profession is a key way to help diversify both the teacher candidate pipeline and the teacher workforce. Barriers such as training programs and testing requirements, high cost, inflexible scheduling, and unpaid student teaching hours minority candidates disproportionately and restrict the recruitment of a diverse teacher workforce. As 80% of the teacher workforce are white females, removing barriers and recruiting more students of color can significantly reduce teacher shortages. Research shows that children benefit from an education provided by a diverse staff of teachers. Research also shows having a teacher that looks like, reflects the student can encourage them to go farther with their education and even consider becoming an educator themselves. Diversity is not only important to help students attain achievement growth, but it also allows those students to recognize that anything is possible for the future.
Thanks, Jessica and Stevie. We're now going to turn to Andrew Lakis, our first panelist. Again, he leads Executive Director of TFA for Eastern North Carolina, but also has been a Pepsi member and a North Carolina Roundtable member. And Andrew's going to talk a little bit about some of the ideas coming out of North Carolina for teacher licensure and other policies. So thanks, Andrew, for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. Can I just get a thumbs up that my sound is working? I've had some technical difficulties this morning. Awesome. Thank you. It's quite an honor to be here, and I'm incredibly grateful to share this morning's time with so many educators throughout our country, and particularly the Southeast, thinking about this question of, how do we build the teacher pipelines we need, that our students and our families need first and foremost. I'll start with just a little bit of humor this morning. For those of you not from North Carolina, my 9-year-old, when I've told him I'm going to Pepsi meetings over the last 3 years, has always said, "Dad, why are you going to meet about Pepsi?" And while in fact, Pepsi was invented in rural Eastern North Carolina, it is kind of a weird acronym for our Professional Educator Preparation Standards Commission. But that group has been doing a lot of work on this effort. And I think, it's probably aligned with what many of you in this call have been thinking about in your work and at a state level. But I think about licensure a lot from 3 distinct moments in my career. I started as a 5th grade teacher almost 20 years ago. And so I have a personal experience with entering the classroom as a non-traditional educator and working and navigating through a licensure process, both as I started in Washington, D.C., and as I transitioned and continued to teach in my home state of North Carolina a few years later. I've also been with Teach for America for over 10 and a half years, and have had the pleasure of working with over 1,000 new teachers who are teaching in our hardest hit, lowest resource communities throughout our state in rural Eastern North Carolina. And particularly over the last 10 years, we have diversified our Teach for America core to where over half of our core members identify as people of color. And we've been it's been a huge undertaking, and we've really worked hard to diversify our teacher force, and as such, the teacher force, educator force within North Carolina. And then third, in my role on both the Pepsi Commission and on the North Carolina Human Capital Roundtable, have really worked with many colleagues and fellow leaders across the state to think about licensure at a systemic level. I've had it personally. I've seen it play out for so many educators who've been highly effective and done great work. And now I've also stepped back, zoomed out, I suppose, and said, okay, what's happening here? And the one analogy I'd offer this morning that I'll borrow from the author Isabel Wilkerson in her book Cast. Early on in that book, she uses what I think is a beautiful analogy for any kind of systems change, but she's talking about racial inequity in our country. She talks about it being like an old house. and that subconsciously, we just get used to living in old houses. Those of us who have lived in one, I lived in one from 1906. And so the things that we settle for, right, that are at first kind of big problems, we put a bucket under a drip in the ceiling, we then just we grow accustomed to looking over. We just say, well, you know, it's raining. It's going to rain later today. I better put the bucket out. But what happens, she proposes, is that we subconsciously kind of get used to systems and structures that don't work for what we say we want. And as a roundtable, we began a couple of years ago to really, you know, start to dig into that old house that is licensure in North Carolina. And what we found is there are a lot of those buckets placed to catch water when it rains. And you know, nothing's wrong with that. I mean, that's the effort of a lot of people to try and make a system work with a deep commitment to getting as many great educators as we can and making sure they're effective with students. But it isn't exactly the house you would design if you were saying, hey, I want a house that really works for what we want. I want a licensure system that makes sure we have, you know, a diverse, effective, you know, group of educators who are able to meet the needs of all the students and families in public schools in North Carolina. And when we did that, we really came across 5 areas that we noticed just weren't adding up. The first is barrier removal, and this idea that when we looked at our system, it was pretty clear that it was actually really hard to even get into the teaching profession and to begin the process of licensure. And while that's not a bad thing, we always want to have high expectations and hold a really high bar. A lot of the things that were creating the barriers, we couldn't actually correlate to effectiveness in the classroom. And so almost in many ways, they seemed like unnecessary barriers. We also noticed that as a state, we have really robust data collection systems. I mean, we have a value-added system that every public school student in North Carolina is a part of, and every teacher is a part of. And yet, almost all of the measures we were using for licensure and for people entering and progressing early on in their teaching career were not tied to any of those outcomes measures that we said we wanted for students. And so in many ways, we wrestled with this idea that maybe we don't actually have a system that is tied to the effectiveness we want to see long term. It seems to be tied to some of those measures that we've already addressed or named as barriers. We obviously looked and you know, noticed, and to Stevie and Jessica's point earlier, that there are real equity gaps. When we look at standardized test bias, when we look at the amount of money it even takes economically to start the teaching profession, in many ways, those barriers were creating inequitable outcomes for who was able to join us and who was able to earn a license and progress in their career as an educator in North Carolina. And then the last 2 we noticed were teacher autonomy. Simply put, like our licensure process, as it was designed and had been kind of duct taped around over time, was not one that put the teacher at the center of driving the process. I mean, they had to call, you know, they had to get hired, they had to find an EPP, they had to then talk to a district, the district had to talk to the Department of Public Instruction. Somewhere along the way, the teacher, beginning teacher might talk to all those groups, but it's far more likely in our research and conversations that the teachers didn't actually understand how licensure was happening. But all these other stakeholders are trying to make it happen for them. And we thought that might not be a very workable solution for the 21st century. In a world where you can get a mortgage or order a Lyft or an Uber at the touch of your phone, young people really want to be in the driver's seat, and they really want to know their options and to be able to make those choices as they progress in their career. And last, you know, we have great teachers in the state of North Carolina, and we noticed there aren't enough career pathways for them, you know, to say, hey, they love teaching, they're great at teaching. We don't necessarily want them to leave the classroom and become a principal or a school leader unless they want to. We didn't have ways for a teacher to progress and earn both more income and more respect in their profession and have an increased growing effectiveness. And so the roundtable took all of that in and said, well, if the current reality of what we have licensure-wise is a system that doesn't work for us, what could we build? And, you know, it was a diverse group of stakeholders from all major sectors of education in our state, and we've spent the last few years kind of really working on this vision. And it's important to note here, too, as I walk you through kind of where we are in this moment, that this is truly a vision and a framework. We have come to believe that much of the licensure change that is needed is actually it's paradigm work. It's like, what do we believe and what beliefs have we held and orthodoxies have we held that have contributed us to doing licensure this way that we need to really explore and ask, is that what we want? Is that what we believe? I think Jessica earlier mentioned like the shift from inputs to outcomes. Like that's a big deal. It isn't so much that we have a plan that we're ready to roll out. Like there isn't a technocratic or detailed, here's everything you would do to make this work. We're at the phase now where we've done this work and we're excited to bring it to more and more stakeholders across our state, teachers, HR directors, superintendents, deans of schools of education, educator preparation programs, legislators, to work together and kind of build a collective effort to say, what could we design and how could licensure work moving forward? But I want to talk this morning about a few of the key concepts that may resonate or it may raise questions for you, and I'm happy to answer those as we go. Next slide, please. So, as we mentioned, or you've noticed kind of a thread throughout this time, we really just, this idea of opening the gates, I think Jessica put it best. As our current licensure system is set up, it's a very narrow entrance. You got to do a few things really early in the career that gets you into this big pool of dots in the middle. There aren't really systematized off-ramps in case a teacher decides this isn't for them, or a principal or a district or the state says this isn't for you. And then you get to the end, and somewhere in there, we've either got a lot of people still working towards licensure, or maybe those dots disappear, but very few, or not nearly as many as we would like, make it through to the other end. And as I mentioned earlier, we particularly saw this play out in terms of equity and diversity. And so that's highly problematic for us. And so as we thought about this, we thought about why there's a narrow entrance, right? Those paradigms. We want to make sure we only have qualified candidates who enter the profession. We want to prevent children from having the unsafe or an ineffective teacher. Those seem to be the two biggest beliefs that are driving that. And obviously those are ones we believe deeply in and want to keep. We did, though, notice that there's a lot of unintended consequences of this current process and setup. The first being that the policies in our system disproportionately impact people of color. The second being that we still have far fewer teachers than we need in the state, with almost 800 vacancies in our state alone. And so this policy or this process we have hasn't actually been able to deliver on the number of teachers we need. And in many ways, as we did interviews with beginning teachers and career teachers, we also found that the very licensure policies we had in place was contributing to a cumbersome and pretty confusing process for them. And in some cases had led people to leave the profession before they had even really, gotten to the sweet spot of their career in that year 3 to year 7 window. So, we've been hard at work on that. And one of the shifts we started to identify and make was this idea of removing some of the gateways early on. And so if we can go to the next slide. We oriented around this idea that we should have off-ramps. And so you'll look here and you'll see that through our 2 years of work, we've really based this on a few ideas. The big vision being we want to offer early, inclusive, and clear pathways into the profession. We want to reward excellence and advancement, and we want to encourage retention so that more teachers are making it to the end of this process. And when they do, we as a state know that they are effective, not just because they've completed certain steps along the way or different input measures, but because they've actually demonstrated effectiveness in the classroom. And so a few things that were important for us as we've taken on this process, and I think are starting to shape this vision. We want to ensure that more people who want to teach in North Carolina can enter the profession, obviously. We want to make sure we're providing hands-on experience earlier in their teaching career. And that's where we started to think about this idea of apprentice teachers. We want to make sure that we have systems and structures in place to help new teachers grow their skills from the first day they enter the classroom. Entry-level teachers would receive mentoring and professional development assistance to help them become more effective teachers for their students. And as they progress, we would see them start to grow. And if they aren't growing, this is where you see the red dots with the squiggly kind of off-ramps there. If it's not working and if they're not effective, we wanted to have a way to help them exit the process that was that was not just by chance, but was actually very strategic and intentional. We also wanted to ensure that we held all teachers to a high standard of effectiveness while allowing them to demonstrate it in different ways, not just passing an exam. In this way, great teachers who are not great test takers still have paths to being licensed. And all teachers, regardless of how they enter the profession, traditional school of education, alternative pathway, apprenticeship program, that they were all given the same options and supports and held to equally high standards. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we wanted to ensure we provided ways for highly effective teachers to achieve advanced credentials that come with greater compensation and opportunities to lead and specialize, while also allowing them to continue teaching students in the classroom. And so as we thought about opening up the pathways and bringing more folks in, and then creating higher standards tied to effectiveness and better supports throughout their stages, we started to develop a model. And next slide, please. And this model is similar to what you saw earlier when Jessica shared. This is kind of what our roundtable has been working on. But the biggest things here is that we really think by systematically creating different opening up multiple pathways and creating different licensure kind of tiers, we'd give teachers more autonomy over their career and their path into the profession, while also making sure that teachers advance through the system by demonstrating skills, competencies, and effectiveness in the classroom with students. And so the idea that North Carolina is considering moving to is a 6-tiered licensure system. It would require mentorship and quality professional growth resources and feedback in the first 4 tiers. So when you look at this chart, all of these first 4 tiers, every single beginning teacher, no matter where they were in tier 1, 2, 3, or 4, they would all get mentorship and access to high quality, verified professional growth opportunities. Once they get to those top 2 tiers, you see that they would have their teaching license, and they would also have the opportunity to continue advancement in their career into one of 2 advanced teacher pathways, classroom excellence by teaching more students, or adult leadership and really contributing to the collective leadership and culture of their school. Obviously, and this should be stated, it was mentioned earlier, we also believe that it's worth exploring how we increase the pay. And that when we increase the pay, we do it in a way that is tied to this. So once a teacher demonstrates mastery, once we see that effectiveness in the classroom, that we would want the pay scale to increase, but also to increase strategically so that everything is aligned to the #1 outcome we all want, every single stakeholder of our roundtable and every single education leader in the state, which is better outcomes for students across the state of North Carolina. And so, as I mentioned, this is a vision and kind of a working plan that we've now been engaging more and more stakeholders around. And as we have been doing this, we've gotten a lot of energy. People, I think, generally think this is bold and a big new way of thinking about licensure, but there's a lot of collective commitment to figure out what this could look like across the state of North Carolina. So I appreciate you letting me share this morning. I could go on for more time, but I know we've got Mark here as well. And I don't know if there are any questions that are coming up, Megan.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, we invite people to ask Andrew questions now for a few minutes. We'll also have another Q&A at the end. If you need a little bit more time to think up some questions, you can write them in the chat box, or you can push the raise your hand button, and Jasmine will allow you to ask your question out loud if you would prefer. We do have one quick question that's already come in for you, Andrew, from Edie Stewart. When you were talking about the current licensure policy framework, she asked, does the narrow entrance represent the classroom or an educator preparation pathway?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a little complicated. So as the licensure is designed, it would be into an EPP program and then into a classroom. Because of that kind of patchwork effort we've talked about and the need for teachers, particularly in our rural schools, in many ways, the gate has already been opened, and our districts have had to hire folks from all backgrounds to teach because there hasn't been enough quality candidates from our EPPs or just from other states. And so as it's designed, it would be a narrowing into a program and then into the classroom. Our current reality is such that this is already happening to a degree, but it's not, you know, our policy and our approach hasn't actually shifted to match the current reality of the needs of our districts and our communities.
Here's some more questions coming through here for you, Andrew. Holly Eaton asks, are there any discussions about roles for each of these tiers? For example, would anyone with less than a full license be operating as a teacher of record? Interesting in staffing design that accompanies these tiers.
Yeah, and Megan, I'm happy to answer here. I know you've worked really closely with us on this here too, so I'll ask you to join me if I miss anything. I mean, I think these are the kind of questions as we've engaged more stakeholders and are kind of working through this that are coming up, right? How would we do this in a way that, you know, allows that teacher autonomy and gets them, you know, actual practice in the classroom, but also ensures that they're not on their own and don't have supports. And so that's where we see the mentorship role being assigned by the state, a really important one. And we also think this is where some principal leadership and thinking about the staffing they have in their building could actually help here too, because the whole point of this is to create more creativity while ensuring that the outcome we want isn't moving, right? Like we want students to be learning. And so I think that is the part that is scariest probably for all of us thinking about this, is like when you remove some of those barriers and you open the gate and you allow more people to get in a classroom and to begin teaching, you know, you're not, yeah, I mean, we more folks would be starting their career, and we would have to have very strong measures in place to ensure they're getting the support they need, and with principal evaluations and using data, making sure that they're having a meaningful impact on students as they start their career.
And I'll just add as the second part of that question there, would anyone less than a full license be operating as a teacher of record? No. In the North Carolina, you know, vision here, anyone operating with that learning permit would act more as like a teacher's assistant, assisting a teacher, learning about the practice of teaching, and most definitely not being a teacher of record. Next question for you, Andrew, from Linnea Bradshaw. What would allow a teacher to skip licenses 2 and 3 in your future model?
Yeah, so we're still working on that piece. And again, this is where I think some of these details we're excited to tap into kind of the collective leadership of the educators and educational leaders across the state. But in the vision for this, we don't see these as time bound, which I think is a huge paradigm shift compared to how we thought about licensure before. The way you would skip it is by demonstrating proficiency. And as I mentioned in the presentation, that isn't just test passage. Test passage could be one way. It could also be a portfolio approach. It could also be, you know, the state setting up ways of doing peer observations and feedback to capture, is somebody demonstrating both content knowledge and mastery of the teaching skills. But once a teacher has proven that in whatever pathways the state lands on, we are proposing that teacher then move to the next level. And so it may take a teacher 1 year to show that. It may take a teacher multiple years to show that. But the goal here is to not have one size fits all time approach for everybody, but to be a little more responsive to the rate at which teachers are able to prove and demonstrate effectiveness as they're beginning their career and moving from one tier to the next.
A second part to Linnea's question, what kind of timelines would you have for your residencies?
Yeah, I don't think we've tackled that piece yet. You know, obviously in a residency, because they would still be working towards being a teacher of record, it's a little different. They wouldn't have data in the same way that a teacher of record would. They wouldn't have entered at a level where they're able to move so quickly from 1 to 4 by demonstrating proficiency. So I think that's an outstanding question that we're still working through and gathering feedback. But I think on that front, the spirit behind that is to get those folks in a classroom with students under supervision, because we believe that the learning happens best in practice, not theoretically, not beforehand, not filling them with a bunch of information or theoretical concepts, but to actually have them with an experienced veteran teacher and in a building with a strong principal, and to help them grow through their practice. And so we need to figure out what time frame makes the most sense and how much practice would actually be enough practice for them to move into that next phase.
Next question for you, Andrew, is from Shirley Prince from North Carolina. Will all those who enter the pipeline without a 4-year teaching degree be expected to eventually earn a 4-year teaching degree on the job before being designated as a licensed expert teacher?
Yeah. Hey, Shirley. Good to hear from you. No, I think the one of the key components of this process is that we would not require a 4-year teaching degree of every teacher because of the shift to an outcomes-based, like practice-based model. That is one of the pathways, and one that we think a lot of educators would choose because it is the one that is known. They could learn on the front end and bring it in. So we're not doing away with that, but it actually would open up the possibility of other pathways for educators as they begin their career.
And just to clarify, I think the question was, by the time they reach license 4 to be an expert teacher, would they be required to get their bachelor's degree? And the answer to that part is yes, they would have to have their bachelor's degree.
Sorry, they'd have to have a bachelor's degree, but it wouldn't have to be a teaching bachelor's degree. They would have to have a bachelor's degree and demonstrated proficiency in the classroom to have the license.
Next question for you, Andrew. You're getting a lot of questions, so we might not have our ending Q&A at the end, but this is great. There's a lot of interest and questions for you right now. Anonymous wrote in, I'm not sure who this was, but most of the strongest research has shown that salary is the #1 attraction or push away, while support in the early years administratively and professionally is #2. We can have all the, in quotes, other pathways, but this only diminishes the quality of teaching with lesser ready. Can you address how the quality of the pipeline does not decrease, but the pipeline also increases in quality with so many other pathways? Thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And I'll offer kind of what we've talked about as a roundtable and yeah, some of the conclusions we've come to that would probably be the source of debate with Anonymous. And I think we should all be talking about these things. You know, our thought on this is the salary absolutely should increase. As we're asking teachers to practice more, we're tying this to outcomes-based effectiveness. We think that increasing the salary and increasing the professional development type funds that we provide to teachers is critically important. Like, those resources not only matter with attracting talent, with retaining talent, and ensuring that talent has the greatest impact. We would agree with that completely. I think where we might diverge here is that we believe, we have a premise that right now, because of the barriers I mentioned earlier, particularly the barriers around diversity and equity, we're actually not even tapping into the talent pool we could. That the talent pool itself is diluted because we don't have as many candidates as we could who could do great things with students in a classroom. That is why we think opening up the pathways and creating more pathways in that are tightly managed on the back end for effectiveness actually will strengthen the teacher pool. And one of the demographic things we've talked about as a roundtable, and I believe in deeply, given my work with young people, is that the demographics and the generational shift in behaviors is also real. The odds of young people today choosing a career for 30 years, even 20 years, and sticking with it are slim. They're just slim. The research tends to show that a college graduate is going to have 3 to 4 careers within their first 20 years of working. And so actually, I believe strongly, and as a roundtable, we've discussed this, that we actually have to be more responsive. We need a system that allows us to capture talent that if they're thinking about it in a more rigid, kind of cumbersome way, long-term, may not ever come. And we want those people, if they're going to be effective in the classroom with kids, even if they stay in the career for 10 years instead of 30. We believe this process will actually allow people to stay longer because they will earn more money, they'll have more autonomy in how they grow their career, and overall the educator pipeline will be stronger, which I think everyone benefits from. But we do actually believe that this strengthens the pipeline and doesn't dilute or create an effectiveness challenge on the back end.
A question from Debbie Burson in Mississippi. Mississippi state statute currently requires a bachelor's degree prior to licensure. What is the conversation in North Carolina around the degree requirement?
Yeah, I mean, I think we still feel strongly that a bachelor's is needed to be the teacher of record and to move towards a full teaching license. I think where we think there's some opportunity to innovate and pilot a new approach is in this apprentice model, where you could, work with somebody who doesn't yet have their bachelor's to be earning a bachelor's while they are also supporting a teacher, as Megan mentioned earlier, and kind of getting real-time experience in a classroom, but not as a teacher of record. That I know of, there haven't been conversations yet of doing away with the bachelor's requirement, but we're trying to find ways to get more folks who are interested in a school building and a classroom, learning with supports while they earn that bachelor's to get to one of the early tiers of actually being a teacher of record.
Not so much a question, but important comment, I think, from Rachel Goins. Apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. She says, seems like observations and training, for example, skills in assessing and recognizing effectiveness, reducing bias when doing so, and giving high quality actionable feedback becomes more important in this structure. Yeah,
100%. And Rachel, I think as a roundtable, we've talked at length about the fact that this process, one of the requirements or kind of, one of the prerequisites of this process working is to have really strong school leaders in place. And I think one of the things that's come up as we've discussed this is the idea that you need really strong school leaders. They have to be really strong at observing, giving feedback, being able to isolate, skill and competencies that are working. They also need autonomy and agency themselves. That's another big piece that we're just aware of, is that in many ways our licensure system ties the hands of many of our administrators and school leaders and doesn't give them the agency to say, hey, I know I'm on the hook for the outcomes of my school. I'm also on the hook for the development of my people. I want to choose the talent I'm going to have in my building, and I know I'm on the hook for growing them and ensuring that we are helping our educators progress in their early career and earn their licensure and continue to grow their effectiveness over time. So we absolutely think those skills and competencies of a school leader or anyone who's doing instructional support in a building are strong. We also want to create a system that gives our school leaders kind of more agency and autonomy to operate in that CEO-like role.
A few more questions for you, Andrew, and then we'll turn this over to Mark by 11. So you have plenty of time, Mark, to discuss and answer questions as well. From Krista Reed, when it comes to pay structure or salary schedules, how are North Carolina or other states bound, prohibited, or stalled by local unions and bargaining agreements?
Yeah, we're not stalled by local unions or bargaining agreements. I mean, North Carolina is the right to work state, legally speaking. I think, our salary schedule for our public school teaching is determined by our state legislature. And then, local LEAs or districts are able to supplement that. We actually noticed that as a pretty big source of inequitable distribution, going back to Jessica's point earlier, which is, a rural community, I've worked most closely with rural communities over the last 10.5 years. They don't have the same resources that our urban areas do to create a supplement or an increased, pay figure to attract or retain talent. And we do see that shift talent pathways in our state. And so the spirit behind this is how do we systematize this more at a state level and provide those resources so that it isn't, districts having to compete against one another for talent, and whoever has the most resources gets the most talent. We actually want this, we hope that this path forward and potential licensure redesign would actually allow students in all 100 counties in North Carolina to have access to more great teachers.
Another question from Edie Stewart. What qualifications or demonstrations of competency would the mentor teachers be required to have? Would that be the responsibility of the prep program or the school district?
Yeah, I don't think we haven't gotten into that granularity yet on the various roles who would support the system. I think we know that those are critically important questions to consider and to invest kind of a variety of stakeholders if we're going to move forward with this and build this out. Yeah, and so I don't know that I have a hard and fast answer on that, other than that's the type of question we know we'll take this from a vision and a framework to actually being a plan we can go execute and move the needle on across our state.
And I'll just put, you guys have had some really great conversations around what should be the requirements from the state level for something like that, minimum requirements built in licensure versus what are the flexibilities that you would grant to local school districts to, add to requirements. So that's really important when you're talking about these kinds of policies, making sure that the state provides minimum requirements to ensure, applicability and ensure that there is, some minimum standard, but allowing flexibility from the districts to continue those discussions.
Yeah, and I guess, Megan, on that front, I'd just add two quick things. We've talked about, using micro-credentials and kind of a badge type structure where you could do trainings and grow skills and kind of adult leadership development. And we've also talked a lot about the idea that if we're going to move towards a more outcomes-based licensure model, we kind of will need to replicate that across the board. So the folks who would want to be mentor teachers would be the ones who've had the most success impacting student learning. And that's through standardized test measures we have in the state. That could be through student surveys. It could be through a variety of measures. But what we really want to know is who's having the greatest impact with children in a classroom. How did those people advance their career, whether that's as a teacher, as a mentor, as an advanced teacher? We want everything to be tied to the #1 priority of the state of North Carolina, which is the advancement and growth of our young people. I mean, that's why we exist as a public education system. And we see this as an opportunity to really align everything to that outcome, starting with our licensure process.
I think we have time for one more question. I've been going in order that the questions were received. So I'll just say the next question that came through in order, and then there's several more in the chat box that Andrew, if you're able to kind of read and chat while Mark's presenting would be great. And I can also try and help answer a few of the questions as well while Mark is presenting. But the last one I think we have time for right now comes in from an anonymous attendee. Again, earlier in the presentation, there seems to be an assumption that many of the best teachers move into administration. Data does not support that that is prevalent. Rather, the biggest swatch to administrator positions is from average or below average teachers. This is well documented, and teachers generally leave based on administration issues because of this. How do these models address the issue of poor administrators that have long been in the field in those roles for supporting new teachers? And I'll just say before Andrew hops in, we actually weren't trying to make the point that the best teachers move into administration, just saying that that is typically the only path up in a lot of states to get increased pay and increased roles. Did not cite any data on what types of teachers move into administration. And I'll hand that over, that second part of the question, to you, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I appreciate the question, and I would echo what you said, Megan. I don't think, we don't believe that the best teachers move on. We just think that that if you want to make more money and you want to have greater influence, as the way it is currently set up within our structure, school leadership is one pathway. We want teacher leadership to be more systematized and available to any highly effective teacher within the state of North Carolina. So in many ways, it's less a specific belief that good teachers are going into school leadership and more. We just want to have multiple pathways for teachers to grow their effectiveness and to get paid more money, considerably more money as they grow their ability and their competency throughout their career. And then one other thing I'd name, and I just come back to this because it was kind of tied to one of the questions prior, is in terms of what are we doing about, underperforming school leaders? This is just a belief the Roundtable has kept coming back to over the last few years, that this is why it matters that all of your systems are aligned to the key outcome you want and that everything is responsive to that outcome. So, it doesn't work when you've got a bunch of different, my opinion, my speaking here, it doesn't work when you've got a bunch of policies or processes that are cumbersome and built in isolation, and then saying, well, then how come everybody's not aligned? How come not every great teacher is tied to the impact they're having on students? How come every great school leader isn't obsessed with finding the great teachers who can, lead to the outcome for students? Of course, there are many school leaders who are great at that, but our system doesn't actually align with it. And so we believe this is a more comprehensive shift to align all of our systems to that result we care most about. Is this a teacher? Is this a school? Is this a school leader who is facilitating life-changing growth academically, personally, social, emotionally for every single student in their care? And right now our system just doesn't align to that. Not just licensure, but across the board. We've made some real strides as a state, and we've seen, programs like the NC State Principal Program start to really move the needle on that in our state. We want everything to align to it. And so I appreciate that question. And I think our hope is that this would allow us to continue to find other systems and places that would just increase the quality and effectiveness of our educator pipeline throughout the state of North Carolina.
Thanks, Andrew.
And Megan, yeah, happy to jump in the chat and answer other questions, but I don't want to bite into any more of Mark's time.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. We'll continue in the chat. And if we have time at the end after Mark's presentation and questions, we can come back to a couple as well. But I want to turn it over now to Mark Dixon, the president of A+ Education Partnership in Alabama and one of our Alabama Roundtable members. Jessica, if you'll click over to his slide. Mark, we'd love to hear about some similar conversations in Alabama.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And I think it's absolutely appropriate for Andrew to go first. I think we've taken a lot of inspiration from the work that the great work that they have done. And it's certainly great to be with you all today. I just wanted to give everyone a little background. Alabama there have been some small moves over the last few years to deal with what has been a growing teacher shortage in our state. One, is certainly compensation and pay. We now have, and this has been a long-term effort over the last several years, but one of the highest average starting salaries in our region. So, there has definitely been a push from just a recruitment standpoint to be very competitive on salary with our neighboring states. There have been loan forgiveness programs put into place, especially for high needs districts. And there is currently a teacher mentoring program as well that has been available. There was also a teacher shortage task force in 2019 that made over 30 different high level recommendations that kind of jump started the conversation about the need for some of the, this focus and for the state to put an effort in this area. We've had local superintendents that have been pushing for more emergency certificates just to fill roles and just to have someone in the classroom, which is certainly a challenge and not where we want to be. Over the last decade, we've seen a 40% decrease in teacher preparation programs in our state. 30% of classrooms currently are taught by out-of-field teachers, and we see about 8% of teachers leave the profession on an annual basis. So those were some of the stats highlighted by that task force. And that really led to the work of the Teacher Quantity and Quality Roundtable, which our state superintendent Superintendent Eric Mackey worked with SREB to establish that roundtable and to go deeper on some of these issues. The roundtable, started kind of at a high level and looking at a variety of issues, really settled on certification, which has long been, the subject of a lot of chatter in our state about its complexity, about its lack of promotion of our most effective teachers, and recognizing, the need there. And A+ in general, we have been working on retention issues and providing greater pathways for teachers really for over a decade. In fact, we had a Governor's Commission on Quality Teaching all the way back in 2008 that recommended what we called then a professional pathways program for teachers that would create different entry points and as well as greater career advancement opportunities for teachers to take on more teacher leader roles and be compensated at a greater level for that. So it has been a conversation and it's been ongoing. And so we've really appreciated this opportunity to dig a little deeper into these issues and come to it. So what the proposal is really turned into from the roundtable is a 3-year pilot proposal. And Jessica, we can go to the next slide here. And we're kind of addressing, instead of taking kind of a wholesale approach like you've seen in North Carolina, where they're taking the entire licensure system and putting that into place. In Alabama, we're at a point where I think we need to prove some of these methods and to build capacity at the local level, and as well as at the state level, frankly, before we're ready, I think, to take on that kind of wholesale change and give districts the opportunity to show that a lot of these can work well and how effective they can be and build the momentum toward more of a wholesale change down the line. So there's really kind of 3 main points to the pilots. The first are teacher residencies. So these would be paid clinical experiences for candidates to receive on-the-job learning. They would come from 2 different pools. One would be an associate's degree with 60 hours of credit. This is really focused on trying to connect with grow your own programs at the local level, trying to build cast a wider net and diversify our teacher pipeline. So that's going to be a brand new pathway to move in. You'll also see the opportunity for teacher prep candidates that are in their final year to do a longer residency, a full year residency than they currently do. And this creates opportunities for partnerships of local districts with institutions of higher learning in our state to try and build closer ties there, but also to identify candidates that may, that would build a greater capacity for new teacher candidates to move into some of our higher needs districts. The next, is certainly a focus and we have recognized the value in Alabama of the need for a mentoring program. While that program exists today, it is a minimum program. It's essentially a $1,000 stipend for a more experienced teacher to provide mentoring to a new teacher. And while there is an effort to expand the quality of that program that is ongoing and several new partnerships underway, there is not the intensive mentorship that we know is necessary, especially in those first 3 to 5 years when we lose most of our new teachers from the profession. And so, we want to provide individualized, intensive mentorship supports to create, for early and struggling teachers and to connect them to new professional development, to work with them and coach them and to provide that ongoing support. And of course, to do that, we're going to need more advanced teachers that are recognized for their abilities and recognized as effective as a pathway as well. And so that leads to more advanced credentialed teachers. And the way we see this breaks down in a couple of different ways. One is a master teacher that recognizes and is recognized for their effectiveness and to increase their capacity to reach more students, but also to work with mentors as well. The second classification is a lead teacher. So this would be more in coaching roles where they could lead teams of teachers and expand their effectiveness to a broader array of both adult teachers and of course students as well, and observing, giving feedback, doing co-teaching. So working through a lot of those different scenarios as well. So we have talked about, kind of the beginning, increasing this pipeline, building those supports of mentoring, and then creating these advanced roles as well. The proposal is to have a 3-year pilot that would be funded by the state at about $1 million a year. That would pay for partners to work with districts, and it'd be about 4 to 6 districts that we're imagining at the moment, to build those programs and expand their capacity. We're also looking to go deeper with those districts, not just for these 3 areas that I laid out, but once you have these master teachers in place, how do you change the culture of the school to make use of those roles? And I say that because currently in Alabama, we have a very strong national board certification, certified teacher program. We do provide stipends for those. We provide greater stipends for those that are in hard to staff subjects and districts. But to use those more effective teachers in a more effective way to expand, not only to have their impact on their individual classroom, but also their impact on their peers, as well as a broader array of students. So trying to make sure that we can take these 4 to 6 different districts, looking at a diverse set of districts, so everything from rural to urban to more districts in poverty. So there's a big focus to make sure that these types of programs can work in a variety of different areas. And so that work will be done over the next 3 years, and we'll be hoping to expand that quickly.
Thanks, Mark. So definitely an extension of a lot of ideas that Andrew laid out coming from North Carolina, but a bit of a different approach with Alabama and wanting to pilot some of these pieces before looking at a wider kind of statewide vision. A couple comments came through about some different subjects here. And again, inviting folks to put questions in the chat. But I just wanted to note that right before you started talking, Mark, one of our participants, Jeremy, and I know I'm not going to pronounce the last name right, so I'll just say Jeremy Z, had said that on the topic of clinicals, and then added more comments after. So this is why I bring this up. But he said, there's no question that paid clinical training during the last 2 years greatly would increase diverse teacher candidate pools. Even middle-class teacher candidates are working 10 to 30 hours a week in part-time jobs, while a full-time junior or senior year students. Paid clinical requirements would invite a whole new group to the profession, knowing that learning in the field would be compensated to cover much of the upper 2 years. This would also open the community college pathways, and that makes a lot of sense if states would fund such models. And then while you were speaking, Mark, he added, he agrees with you that companies pay internships, which is a serious disadvantage to attract to the teaching profession over other STEM careers. So I wanted to note that, and there's a couple folks who agreed with Jeremy on there, and just see if you have any more comments on that topic, Mark.
No, I appreciate it, and couldn't agree more. And a couple of things. One, we currently don't have a community college pathway for teachers in Alabama. That is one of the things that the roundtable is recommending that we change. And part of the goal of having that associate's degree and the ability to partner both with our community college system as well, I think is a real benefit. We do have a pilot program right now for teachers in our pre-K program that can move into a pre-K assistant teacher, and while they're getting their associate's degree, and then move into that lead teacher role as well. So there is precedent in our state for that, and we've seen a lot of success there. So I couldn't agree more.
Great, and there are some good points and a couple great links to different things about teacher pay from Tim Newbert. Appreciate those comments and those links, and I'll just say, while we've addressed some high level kinds of topics here around teacher pay, teacher salary schedules, and the like, that will be a main topic of our next webinar next week. So we'll go into a lot more detail about teacher pay and teacher salaries on that webinar. So folks who are interested in that topic and some great research on that, we're going to be debuting some research we've done at SRAB on the topic, and I encourage you all to tune in next week for that. Another comment from Jeremy Z. Mark, I'm at UA, which I guess is University of Auburn, or I'm not sure if is that Auburn or Alabama?
Alabama.
Alabama. Okay, I'm sorry. Not not from Alabama here. He's at University of Alabama. Reach out to me in the state, and my research agenda is related to programmatic design impact on content knowledge and pedagogical knowledge and practice. So
thanks, Jennifer. We'll be talking more.
Question in from Holly Eaton. Mark, can you clarify the issue of associate's degree? Teacher residents would have an associate's degree, but they would eventually acquire a bachelor's degree in order to become fully certified?
That's the general idea. We haven't fully worked out all of the details of what that would look like. Right now there is not a strong partnership at the community. Anyone who goes to community college, there's a general associate's degree. They have a lot of different other pathways into a variety of different industries. There's not just a current pathway for teaching. And so that's something that is being discussed currently. The idea here is that yes, if you have an associate's degree, you'd be working either in a traditional program or an alternative program to be certified while you're being paid for that clinical experience, so that you're getting that on-the-job learning while you're going through that process. And hopefully, if this is a quality candidate, districts that may have trouble recruiting teachers, they already have that connection. They're in the building, they're developing those relationships. And so I think that's an opportunity for some of our districts that have trouble recruiting to build a greater pipeline.
A question from Amy Beasley. So is Mark saying that a lead teacher leads the mentor teachers? Please explain more how this works.
Yeah, so in terms of the lead teachers and the master teachers, both of those could serve as mentors in that field. The difference in a lead teacher would be, we took some inspiration from the opportunity culture at Public Impact here, that you could have teams of teachers co-teaching, where a lead teacher is responsible for multiple classrooms, working with existing teachers in the classroom, but also those teacher residents as well, so that you could have all of those teachers working and learning together. We have a decent amount of coaches actually in the area of reading in Alabama. Integrating them more into the classroom environment and to have those roles, I think, is something that's really necessary. We also don't want to see as many teachers leave the classroom, to move and to go into different areas, whether that be administration or that being a coach, where they're not necessarily working in the classroom with students every day. So this is an opportunity for them to continue teaching while they're also working with adults as well.
A second question from Holly on this. Any discussions about facilitating teacher aides to become certified as teachers? Seems like a natural pool of potential teacher candidates and who already have clinical experience. State-funded tuition reimbursement programs would be needed, along with other supports.
I love the thought, and we have definitely talked about teacher aides when we talk about these residencies, that would be a natural pool. So I totally agree with you, and I think the fact that it's a paid experience as well, helps them get paid while they're getting the additional credentials that they need to move it and be a fully credentialed teacher.
No other questions have come through for you yet, Mark.
There is a comment by Kelly Taylor White, who says, in specific fields of SPED, the private industry draw into assessment, private educational institutes, etc., draws teachers away because of the perceived lack of support and assistance with the additional paperwork requirements, etc. If we put incentives, beyond salary, advancement support, PD, etc., these teachers may be lured back or persuaded to remain.
Absolutely, and I think we've seen certainly we're having a renewed conversation around high quality professional learning in our state. Part of the other half of my organization is actually we have two programs. One is the Alabama Best Practices Center, which provides professional learning through networks around the state, where teachers can come together, learn from each other as they're learning new best practices. So they can, now they have a statewide network that they can pull from. And similar to our, the mentoring program, I think the idea there is to provide them with ongoing support and a network that especially during difficult times like we're seeing over the last year, to work together to identify new ideas and ways to address challenges in the classroom. And certainly, I think paperwork and other requirements are a strong and problem that we have in our system. We don't have anything currently on in terms of our state, there's not a big push there, but I couldn't agree more. And I think it's something that we can dig further into.
Mark, I wanted to ask you a question. One thing that you didn't cover, but I know that the roundtable discussed, and I think is an interesting idea maybe to share a little bit about with folks, is when you all were talking about advanced credentials and envisioning master teachers leading more students and lead teachers helping to coach their peers, an idea came up on lead teachers to potentially also have something that you guys called a lead circuit teacher, where they could teach and mentor in multiple schools or districts. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's really interesting, especially now in the COVID times.
Yeah, I think, obviously our traditional structure is very local district centered. Everyone you work in your district and you're focused there, and that's traditionally how we've been. One of the ideas was, especially as we were talking about mentoring and those more advanced roles, there was a concern that many of our rural districts would not have enough teachers at the level that we're talking about here. And so there was an idea that, what if you had a lead teacher that would be at that level, that could work in a variety of different districts, almost as a circuit teacher, that could provide that ongoing and mentoring support. We actually have a similar idea right now in the area of literacy, where we not only have building-based coaches, but we also have regional coaches that work directly with a variety of different districts that are struggling in the bottom in terms of achievement related to literacy. And so they work with not only the coaches, but also with principals and working with different systems to understand the challenges they have at the district level and the support and the additional supports they need. So there's some precedent for that. And so that was another idea, just trying to think through the way that we can share more resources and promote the effectiveness of our best teachers.
Great, thank you, Mark. And thank you all for questions for both Mark and Andrew. No more questions have come through for you yet, Mark. So Andrew, I'll just give you 2 more minutes here if you want to jump in and kind of address any of the questions you've seen in the chat, or kind of make a wrap-up comment with anything that sparked from Mark's remarks as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and just really appreciate the dialogue and the questions. I did have a chance to type some responses in the chat, so if somebody had a question to me that wasn't answered, feel free to check. I mean, I think at the risk of this being a wholly inadequate way to wrap up this type of conversation, I think the only thing I just would underscore, and why I love these questions, is that there's so much work as a state of North Carolina, and any state taking something like this on, that still would need to be done, and where you have to have teachers and HR directors and other folks at the table to do it, right? One of the spirits behind this vision we built is like user-centered design. Like, what would happen if we designed licensure with the student and the educator in mind? Like, what would we design? Or like, it would not be what we have currently, and it would look very different. But the only way to do that kind of user-centered design is to prototype and ask a lot of questions of the people who are going to be most impacted by what you design. And so I think these are the kind of questions we're excited to, bring more and more folks into this vision and build. I think the headline I would offer, though, is like, as you're probably experiencing listening to this and all the questions popping up, we've experienced through the 3 years of this work, the way we think about policy, licensure, teacher preparation is so kind of ingrained in our own path as educators, or the way we thought about it, that it really does take, I think, a collective group, and that's why I'm so grateful for the roundtable, to push and to pull and to question and to say, well, why do we do it that way? Should we do it that way? How would we kind of rethink this? Because it's just it is a true reimagination of licensure. This is not like here's the playbook, go tinker it. Alabama do this, South Carolina do that. I think it truly is what we hope for it to be, is a human-centered design process, and that obviously takes time. It takes lots of conversation and dialogue, and to really be proximate to what the impact is going to be on the main chief users, which in this case we believe are students and beginning teachers. So I just offer that, and really grateful for this chance to keep the conversation going.
Thank you. Mark, a final comment from you?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think that it's so much of what we do and we have the tendency to do at the state level is be very top down in our approach, and I think part of what we're trying to gain in this pilot is to build those test cases, build those experiences on the local level that can show how all of this works, and instead of just for us, we were a little concerned that if we went for a wholesale reform of the structure without districts really understanding what the purposes of a lot of this was and the ability to test it out, that we wouldn't get there. Because I think we're a few steps behind North Carolina, particularly in the area of evaluation, and that's another conversation that we're having in the state right now to try and build that system up. So I think we're learning a ton, and I think part of to your point, I think we have to put teachers and principals in the driver's seat and give them the authority they need to try different things and to innovate and look at different ways that we can push and change the system on a daily basis. So it's definitely early days, and I think to your point, there's a lot of work left to be done. But we're excited about the opportunity to try something different and promote the best teachers that we have.
Thanks, Mark and Andrew. We're also really excited about this, and there are other states having very similar conversations right now on these issues. A few of our roundtable states, as well as some others who are showing interest. So SRB is always open, willing, and wanting to be a partner with different states having conversations like this. We really feel like Alabama and North Carolina have shown some templates that could lead to potential success, and that could be really winning ideas for states and trying to help end the teacher shortage issue and increase our teacher pipeline. We also really think that these ideas, we wanted to bring them to you because we feel like they can help potentially restore the respect that the profession deserves, and that's something that continuously comes up as we start these conversations with roundtables, as we talk with other education leaders and policymakers in states. That's the number one issue that we're hearing. The respect for the teaching profession is declining. And so that's been at the forefront of all these conversations. And I just want to mention that because I feel like it's a great concern for many. And that was part of the intense dialogue here with both Alabama and North Carolina's roundtables, as well as making sure that there's a return on the investment to our students, to our teachers, and making some of these changes really becomes an investment for states' workforce and economies as a whole. So we're happy to bring these ideas to you and help continue these conversations in both of these states as well as all the other states in our region. There was a comment that came through that actually is a great lead up to another final piece I wanted to mention from Mary Hipp. She says there's growing interest in the development of a licensure compact to facilitate the mobility of teachers. How might these efforts discussed today relate to the development of such a compact and any related legislation to be considered by states? Mary, it's a great point and something we've been talking about for quite some time at SREB. We're hoping actually to begin some important conversations with different states and as well as with funders to potentially develop a licensure compact, just like you're saying, and helping states really think through improved licensure policies and potential universal reciprocity as well. So please reach out to us, Mary, if that's something that folks in your state are interested in. And we're working really hard to kind of get that idea going. And we see that as a great potential service to our states if we're able to get that up off the ground. So wanted to one quick plug again. We have our third in the webinar series coming up next week. A lot of talk today about teacher supports like mentorship and other kinds of supports and teacher compensation. And that is the main topic of our webinar next week. We're going to go very deep into what teacher supports currently look like, what research says they should look like, and some success spots around the country on that, as well as hear from members of our roundtables in Oklahoma and Mississippi, and another roundtable member from Alabama, and also some new data coming out of SRAB on teacher compensation that we'd really like to share with folks. We think will be an important part of the conversation in talking about increasing compensation as well as redesigning teacher salary schedules. So please tune into that next Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. Again, thanks to Mark, thanks to Andrew, and our full SRAB team here. Please reach out to us if you have other questions. We're really glad that you guys joined us today, and we hope it sparked some interesting, difficult, but very needed conversations in your own states here in the next coming months and years. Have a great day, everybody.